So I want to try you a guided fantasy. In psychology, a guided fantasy sometimes shakes up your mind a little bit and allows you new information to come through. So there may be people out there who resent the theme of what's is going on here. And I would like to follow this fantasy out because I think it illustrates what we're talking about here. Let's pretend, okay? Imagine that you wake up in the morning and you see that the president of China has just shaken hands with the president of Mexico, and they have agreed to build a large Chinese military base in Baja California. Okay? It will house aircraft carriers, submarines, and troops. And it's a new bilateral relationship, and the Chinese say to the Americans, don't worry, we're just upgrading our Pacific presence. Oh, really? Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, they're going to become apoplectic. China is going to have a military base in our hemisphere? Give me a break. That's not acceptable. They're going to have an aircraft carrier 12 miles off the coast of Los Angeles and have spy planes listening to email and telecommunications in San Francisco up and down the California coast? Unacceptable. Even if it's in international waters, totally unacceptable. Then you wake up, and a month later, China has just signed a new agreement in Honduras that they are going to have a base in the Caribbean. They say, we're going to just upgrade our Caribbean presence. Shouldn't be threatened by that. We have a number of relationships with Caribbean countries, and we want to have a base there. And again, Americans are going crazy that they are going to have ships and planes and troops and be able to threaten Florida. Finally, you read another article that the Chinese have decided, with the cooperation of the government of the Bahamas, to build a new military base in New Providence, which is right near Nassau. It's 175 miles from Florida. It's a $1 billion base, and it's going to house 20 warships. And again, our media is going to go crazy. We should break off relations with Mexico, break off relations with the Bahamas. We should quarantine the area and not let these ships in. After all, it's just like what the Soviets tried to do with Cuba a generation ago. We cannot allow this to happen. Again, they'll have ships 12 miles off the coast of Washington, D.C. and New York City listening to our communications. We cannot allow that to happen. Are you following this crazy thought? Well, this is not even close to reality. Agreed? Fine. Now let's come back to reality from our guided fantasy. Okay? This is a map of China. All right? And those little black planes are American military bases. We have 2 military bases on China's eastern coast. We have 4 military bases in China's southern region, and we have 4 military bases on the west section of China. We have 10 military bases surrounding China. We do to them all the time what we would never accept them doing to us. Okay, we actually do have. We're building a base in South Korea now that is a $1 billion base, which will house 20 warships, just like they were going to build in the Bahamas. It's 187 miles from the Chinese border. And we're building a $1 billion base. And we say we're just upgrading our Pacific presence. The Chinese should not be threatened by what we're doing. So what we're doing to China, we would never accept for China doing to us. It's just out of the question. There's China's one aircraft carrier, and it doesn't have any aircraft on it yet. They're just building it. So if you look at the United States reach with our 900 and some odd military bases, compare that to Russia. Russia has 10 overseas military bases, and almost all of them are in the former Soviet Union, like in the Ukraine. China doesn't have any overseas military bases. They're thinking of building one. Okay? How do we explain that, except to say that it is the American empire that has this incredible planetary reach, not simply our country. If you look at military expenditures of all the countries in the world, the United States makes up 43%. A few years ago, it was 48%. All the other countries in the world, and our military budget is about almost equal to what everybody else spends. Now, what is the consequence of having an empire like this that extends to 70% of the planet? Well, this is a map of consumption. The countries in red consume the most. So you can see who's the king of the castle here in this display. The United States of America consumes the most on this planet. That is to say, we are the largest consumer of natural resources. We're only 4.5% of the population of the world, but we consume more natural resources than anybody else. We consume 3 times more than the global average consumption of meat. The United States consumes twice as much paper as a European does, as Europe does. We burn more gasoline than the next 20 countries combined. And we consume more cereal, grain, and rice than India, which has 3 times our population. So, in the meantime, while this empire is building and we are consuming and aggrandizing ourselves, 1 in 6 people on this planet lives in a slum. 1 in 6 people on this planet lives on less than $1 a day. The UN definition of absolute poverty means living on less than $2 a day, and that includes half the human race. So, the question to ask here is this empire for you? Are they doing this for you, for us, for the average American? Are we, we ought to be happy that they're doing all that for us. Well, that's not really true. The number of millionaires in the United States has increased 20% in the last 5 years. There are 408 American billionaires in 2012. We're talking about this empire is not really meant for us. You're kind of just a bystander to it. The 400 richest Americans have more wealth than half the American population. Okay? We're talking about an upper crust elite that seems to be behind this empire. The 450 richest Americans have a combined net worth greater than the entire gross domestic product of the continent of Africa. It's staggering how much wealth has been accumulated. So, one question to ask, let's have another guided fantasy. What if there was no empire? After all, 90% of the polled Americans said they don't want to have an empire. What if we didn't have an empire? What would it look like if there was no American empire? So if you include the military budget of the Veterans Administration and retirement benefits, it comes out to be at $902 billion. All right? Now, that's almost 60% of all the revenue collected in the United States goes towards the empire. So what would happen if we made a national decision not to have an empire? What if we said, okay, we're going to put an end to this empire, and our budget we'll have twice as much as Russia, but we will take Russia's budget and China's budget, and that's how much we'll spend on defense. So that we're spending more than the Chinese, more than the Russians, and we'll take care of our veterans. And that's all we're going to do. We're not going to have 1,000 military bases across this planet. We're going to just defend our own country and make sure that we're better than the Russians. After all, Mitt Romney said the Russians were the greatest geopolitical threat. So what if we had a military budget that was twice what the Russians' budget is, and China's? That would mean that our budget would be $339 billion, not $902 billion. Okay? Are you following? We're taking Russia's budget, China's budget, adding VA benefits, and that's how much we spend for defense. This is another fantasy. Okay, so go along with this. $563 billion is saved every year. Now, what would you do with $563 billion? This is a shift in paradigm, okay? A shift in thinking. We could start helping the homeless, and we could close the Pentagon's 240 golf courses. Really, the Pentagon operates 240 golf courses. So what if we did say, okay, the empire's over. We're going to start taking care of Americans. How would you spend $563 billion per year? Follow this out. This is kind of fun. There are 20 million students who go to college in the United States. It is one study says that the average fee, the average cost of a 1 year of college in a 4-year public college is $12,000 a year. What if we gave every student who qualified, who is admitted to college, junior college, private, whatever, a $12,000 scholarship? That's a free college education. That would cost $240 billion. And you say, oh, that's a nanny state, socialism, communism. No. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Brazil, Greece, Argentina, they all have free college education for their students. It could happen. They're not socialist, communist countries. It could happen with a change in paradigm, a change in attitude. There are 40 million Americans who live below the poverty line, 20 million who live in extreme poverty, which is $2 a day. If every single person, man, woman, and child, who fits that description got a check for $7,000, first of all, there would be no extreme poverty in the United States of America. Secondly, the amount of poverty in this country would be cut by about 70%. That would cost $280 billion per year. What a difference in attitude. But there's more. There are 3.5 million homeless people in the United States living out in the streets. 70% of them are poor. 30% of them are mentally ill. It has been argued that if you gave every person a voucher for $610, they could go and get themselves a room. They could rent an apartment. They could rent a room. They'd get off the streets. Now, the mentally ill homeless cannot live independently. It costs $12,000 a year to deal with their more specific issues. But for $34 billion a year, this country could eliminate homelessness. Okay? So, we have followed out a fantasy in which we are making America simply defend itself, not all of our economic interests of the elite class. And look what we're doing with our population. But we still have $9 billion left over from that savings. This is a picture of the city of Detroit. This is another picture of the city of Detroit. Detroit is on the verge of bankruptcy. In fact, it's almost in receivership as we speak. That's the former General Motors headquarters in Detroit. Detroit has closed 50% of its schools because it cannot afford to buy water or sewage or pay its teachers or pay its pensions. Detroit needs a minimum of $35 million a year just to kind of survive. There are 16 cities in the United States that are like that, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. It would cost about $9 billion to rescue them. Imagine, we could rescue the 16 most fragile American cities, including Detroit. So that's a nice little fantasy. I would like to give you now a conclusion to this little exercise, and I hope you'll follow this reasoning through. Indeed, the American empire exists, and its tentacles reach across the entire planet. To believe that we are not an empire is to live in denial, to live in a dream, to shut one's eyes to reality, and indeed to our own history. The American empire possesses the world's reserve currency, the American dollar. It influences finance, investment, capital formation, and plays an almost controlling influence on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The United States has enough power to sanction entire countries as disparate as North Korea, Burma, or Iran, freeze their assets, forbid transactions with them, and even punish countries who violate our rules. Greece used to buy Iranian oil, but the U.S. politely asked it to stop. If Greece refuses, the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank will not loan Greece the money it needs. Greece has no choice in the matter. American leverage is king. The American empire is king. We lay out the conditions, set the terms, and define the parameters. Our military might exceeds all other countries on Earth, and 1,000 military bases monitor, police, and patrol the Earth's oceans, supply routes, and most of its trade. We have bases in the middle of the Indian Ocean, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the Pacific, hundreds of miles from anywhere. Why? To patrol and police all of the oceans of the world, perhaps, or to be able to send long-range bombers anywhere in the world. The U.S. military, the American empire, has a central command known as the CENTCOM, which has divided up the entire planet into areas of responsibility. Each subdivision responsible for Asia or Africa, as in USA Africa Com, or South America, as in USA South Com. Can you imagine that we have a military command for the entire continent of Africa? Correction. We have a military command assigned to every area of the planet except Antarctica. What other country in the world does this? Our great military adventure consumes almost 60% of our entire federal budget in its increasing efforts to achieve hegemony, empire, and dominance on Earth. But 90% of the American people do not want an empire. So what if we just stopped? What if Diego Garcia was closed? What if we stopped policing the Indian Ocean? What if we closed our central command for Africa? What if we just went back to just being a single country that defended itself and took care of its own people? Just 6% of the planet's surface and 4.5% of the planet's population. That's all. To mothball 9 of our 11 naval armadas. To repatriate 500,000 Americans occupying those 1,000 military bases. To close down our central commands over every continent of the planet. And while we're at it, let's return Guantanamo to Cuba. After all, the first president of Cuba was installed by the United States of America in 1903. And one of his first acts of office was to sign over Guantanamo to us in perpetuity. He was an American. He was from New York City. As John Stossel would say, give me a break. In 1964, President Johnson said that an American ship was attacked in international waters by North Vietnam. This so enraged Congress, it authorized the president to begin the Vietnam War. Years later, when the Pentagon Papers were published, we learned the American ship was inside North Vietnamese territorial waters. Huge American secret we didn't want to get out. The entire legal basis authorizing the Vietnam War was based on a lie. When George Bush Sr. tweaked the heartstrings of Congress with the story that Saddam Hussein was throwing babies out of incubators, he similarly got authorization from Congress to go to war on the basis of this public relations stunt. He killed 138,000 people on the wings of this lie, each time telling the American people we were fighting for liberty and justice, when in fact we were fighting to regain control over 1/5 of the world's oil and trying to put back in power an all-male autocracy led by a fat, promiscuous multi-billionaire who got married and divorced on almost a weekly basis. Finally, his son, George W., tells the American people Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons, another falsehood, and another 100,000 people who perished. Since World War II, we have helped take the lives of 5 million people in pursuit of our global ambitions, and in the process, our nation has become a lie, a deception, and a hypocrisy. If we free ourselves from this propaganda, abandon our delusions, and peek out from the protective borders of denial, we begin to see reality finally. And what we see in America is not what we were taught, not what we believe in, and no longer representative of our values and aspirations. It is time for a genuine shift in paradigm, a new consciousness, not based on propaganda, deception, delusion, denial, but one based upon awareness and humanity. What if the Occupy Wall Street movement finally got its agenda clarified and defined and demanded that we reorganize our priorities, dismantle the empire, and return to our own country and our own people, instead of aiding and abetting the ambitions of the richest 1%? It is the 1% who want to see the empire expand and flourish, not for the benefit of the world, not for our benefit, but for their own aggrandizement. This is a picture of a stadium holding 57,000 people. Imagine the richest 57,000 Americans sitting in that stadium. Now that's not the top 1%. That's like 1/6 of the top 1%. These are the 57,000 richest fat cats in American society. Altogether, they possess $7.8 trillion in net worth. Now, I don't know if you can see that little circle there, but that's where the 6 heirs of the Walton family are sitting. These 6 people who have inherited the Walmart fortune, they are worth more than 100 million Americans. They have more cash in their mattresses, stocks, bonds, real estate, and in the Cayman Islands than 100 million Americans. Now, these 57,000 wealthiest Americans have more money than the entire domestic product, the gross domestic product of South America plus Africa plus Australia. That means that those 57,000 people could buy everything that South America, Africa, and Australia produced in a single given year. All the cars, all the services, all the computers, all the food. Currently, some 53% of recent American college graduates are either unemployed or employed in a job that does not require a college education. Think Starbucks. There is a deep vein of discontent within the United States about the fundamental paradigm and direction this country is taking. 40 million poor in the United States, 45 million on food stamps, middle class incomes falling 4% in the same period of time that the number of millionaires has increased 20%. Awakening from our delusions and lifting the veil of denial, it is actually possible to change all that. By dismantling the empire, we could completely end homelessness in 2 years. We could completely eliminate extreme poverty in the United States. We could cut the total poverty rate by 70%. We could provide every American student a free college education, and all for the price of putting an end to the appetites of the gargantuan military colossus and superpower that we have become. It is possible to retreat from empire, from hegemony, and actualize the vision and ideals that lie suppressed inside the heart and soul of America. And it is all within our reach. Thanks for watching.